The Red Death had long devastated the country. No pestilence had ever been so fatal or so hideous. Blood was its avatar and its seal, the madness and the horror of blood. There were sharp pains and sudden dizziness, and then profuse bleeding at the pores, with dissolution. The scarlet stains upon the body and especially upon the face of the victim, where the pest band which shut him out from the aid and from the sympathy of his fellow men, and the whole seizure, progress, and termination of the disease were incidents of half an hour.
But Prince Prospero was happy and dauntless and sagacious. When his dominions were half depopulated, he summoned to his presence 1,000 hale and light-haired friends from among the knights and dames of his crown, and with these retired to the deep seclusion of one of his crenellite abbeys. This was an extensive and magnificent structure, the creation of the prince's own eccentric yet august taste.
The external world could take care of itself. In the meantime, it was folly to grieve or to think. The prince had provided all the appliances of pleasure. There were buffons, there were improvisators, there were ballet dancers, there were musicians. There was beauty, there was wine. All this and security were within. Without was the Red Death. It was toward the close or the 5th or 6th month of his seclusion that the Prince Prospero entertained his 1,000 friends at a masked ball of the most unusual magnificence.
It was a voluptuous scene, that masquerade. But first, let me tell of the rooms in which it was held. There were 7, an imperial suite in many palaces. However, such suite formed a long and straight vista, while the folding doors slide back nearly to the walls on either hand, so that the view of the whole extent is scarcely impeded. Here the case was very different, as mine had been inspected from the Duke's love of the bizarre.
These windows were of stained glass whose color varied in accordance with the prevailing hue of the decorations of the chamber into which it opened. That at the eastern extremity was hung. For example, in blue and vividly blue were its windows. The second chamber was purple in its ornaments and tapestries, and here the panes were purple. The third was green throughout, and so were the casements. The fourth was furnished and lighted with orange. The fifth with white, the sixth with violet. The seventh apartment was closely shrouded in black velvet tapestries that hung all over the ceiling and down the walls, falling in heavy folds upon a carpet of the same material and hue.
In the 7th apartment there stood against the western wall a gigantic clock of ebony. Its pendulum swung to and fro with a dull, heavy, monotonous clang, and when the minute hand made the circuit of the face, and the hour was to be stricken, there came from the brazen locks of the clock a sound which was clear and loud and deep and excellently musical, but of the specular and note and emphasized that, and each lapse of an hour, the musicians of the orchestra were constrained to pause momentarily in their performance, to hearken to the sound, and thus the walters perforce cased their evolution, and there was a brief disconcert of the whole gay company, and while the chimes of the clock yet rang, it was observed that the Jerius grew pale and more aged and seated paced their hands over their brows as if in confused reverie or meditation.
But when the echoes had fully ceased, a light laughter at once pervaded the assembly. The musicians looked at each other and smiled, as if at their own nervousness and folly, and made whispering vows, each to the other, that the next chiming of the clock should produce in them no similar emotion. And then, after the lapse of 60 minutes, which embraced 3,600 seconds of time that flies, there came yet another chiming of the clock, and then were the same disconcert and tremulousness and meditation as before.
But in spite of these things, it was gay and magnificent revel. The tastes of the Duke were particular. He had a fine eye for color and effects. He disregarded the decora of mere fashion. His plans were bold and fiery, and his conceptions glowed with barbaric lustre. There are some who would have thought him mad. His followers felt that he was not. It was necessary to hear and see and touch him to be sure he was not.
And then, for a moment, all is still and all is silent save the voice of the clock. The dreams are still frozen as they stand, but the echoes of the chime die away. They have endured but an instant, and a life half-subdued laughter floats after them as they depart. And now the music swells, and the dreams live, and cry to and through more merrily than ever, taking you from the many tinted windows through which stream the rays of the tripods, and the blackness of the sable drapery appalls. And to him whose foot falls on the sable carpet, there comes from the new clock of ebony and muffled, peal more solemnly hepatic than any which reaches their ears who indulge in the more remote gates of the other apartments.
Suddenly, a strange figure was noticed in the place. The mask which concealed the visage was made so nearly to resemble the countenance of a stiffened corpse that the closest scrutiny must have difficulty in detecting the she. And yet all this might have been endured, if not approved, by the mad revellers around. But the mummers had gone so far as to assume the type of the Red Death. His vesture was dabbled in blood, and his broad brow, with all the features of his face, was sprinkled with the scarlet horror.
When the eyes of Prince Prospero fell on this spectral image, which, with a slow and solemn movement, as if more fully to sustain its role, stalked to and fro among the waters, he was seen to be convulsed, in the first moment with a strong shudder, either of terror or distaste, but in the next, his brow wrinkled with rage.
It was in the eastern or blue chamber in which stood Prince Prospero as he uttered these words. They ran through the 7 rooms slowly and clearly, for the prince was a bold and robust man, and the music had become hushed at the waving of his hand.
It was in the blue room where stood the prince, with a group of pale courtiers by his side. At first, as he spoke, there was a slight rushing movement of this group in the direction of the intruder, who at the moment was also near at hand, and now, with deliberate and stately step, made closer approach to the speaker, but from a certain nameless away, with which the mad assumption of the moment had inspired the whole party. There were found now who put forth a hand to seize him, so that, unimpeded, he passed within a yard of the prince's person, and while the vast assembly, as with one impulse, shrank from the centres of the rooms to the walls, he made his way uninterruptedly, but with the same silent and measured step which had distinguished him from the first, through the blue chamber to the purple to the green, through the green to the orange, through this again to the white, and even thence to the violet. A desired movement had been made to arrest him. It was then, however, that the Prince Prospero, maned with rage and the shame of this momentary cowardice, rushed hurriedly through the 6th chamber, while none followed him on account of a deadly terror that has seized upon all.
He bore aloft a drawn dagger and had approached in rapid impetuosity to within 3 or 4 feet of the retreating figure, when the latter, having attained the extremity of the vaulted apartment, turned suddenly and confronted his pursuer. There was a sharp cry, and the dagger dropped gleaming upon the sable carpet, upon which most instantly afterward fell prostrate in death the Prince Prospero. Then, summoning the wild courage of despair, a few of the revelers at once threw themselves into the black apartment, and seizing the mummers whose tall figure stood erect and motionless within the shadow of the ebony clock, gasped in unutterable horror and finding the grave cerements and corpse like a mass which they handled with so violent a rodents, untenanted by any tangible form.
And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Dead. He had come like a thief in the night, and one by one dropped the red blares in the blood-bedewed halls of the rebel, and died each in the despairing posture of his fall. And the life of the ebony clock went out with that of the last of the gay, and the flames of the tripods expired, and darkness and decay and the Red Death held a immovable dominion over all.